Hello everyone, and welcome back to Java with John. Today, we are diving into a really important concept in programming, and that is what we call loops. So loops might sound a bit technical, but trust me, they are everywhere in our daily lives. Let me tell you a short story about Matatus. It's actually a continuation of what we had started on last time. Imagine this. It is rush hour in Nairobi. The sun is blazing, the streets are vibrant. Our story today features a determined Matatu driver, whose name is John, and his trusty Matatu or 14-seater Matatu, which he calls the Swift Safari. So John's goal for the day is simple. He needs to fill his Matatu with 14 passengers to make enough money for his family. Now, think about what John does every time a Matatu pulls up to a stage like Odeon or Kencom. So he opens the door, and his tout starts shouting and ushering people in. So the shouting is just to attract as many passengers as possible. What happens next? So the first passenger gets in. John doesn't drive off, does he? From there, the second passenger gets in. John is still waiting. The third passenger gets in. John is still waiting, and so on until the 14th passenger gets in. Once the 14th passenger gets in, John looks back, gives his tout the nod, and off they go, speeding off towards their destination. Now, at this point, let's think about it like a computer program. So John's action of waiting for a passenger and letting them in is like an instruction in our code. And how many times does he repeat it? He repeats it 14 times. He doesn't stop after 5 passengers, and he doesn't try to squeeze in 20. He has a clear condition for when he stops. That is, when he has 14 passengers. This, my friend, is exactly what a loop does in programming. Now, we have the primary components of most loops. A majority of them. So we have the initialization, which sets up a counter or a control variable. We have the condition. So this is the Boolean condition that is evaluated and is supposed to be determined to be true if the loop is supposed to execute. We have the iteration or the update. So this is simply where the counter is modified or the control variable within the loop body. And then we also have the loop body. So this is the block of statements, the block of code, which are supposed to be executed repeatedly. Now, we have 3 types of loops, which we are going to be covering today. We have what we call the while loop. We have what we call the do while loop. And we have what we call the for loop. So those 3 are what we are going to be focused or concentrating on today. So without much further ado, let's start. And the first example I would like to give is on the while loop. So what we're going to do is threefold actually. So we're going to look at the syntax. We are going to look at how the code executes, and then we are going to just explain or go through the whole process. So I would like to create a class. I'll just call it while example. So we shall just save this first. Then I'll just add main there. Then we shall look at the syntax of the while loop first. So the syntax basically of the while loop looks something like that. We have the loop body in here. We have the condition, the Boolean condition to be evaluated whether it's true or false. Okay, sorry, I removed the brackets. So that is how the while loop is supposed to look. Now, in the case of John, this is where John says, I will keep opening the door, and I'm looking at this point especially, I will keep opening the door and waiting for passengers as long as my Matatu is not full. So he might not get any passengers at all if the stage is completely empty from the start. So what happens in a while loop is that the condition is checked at the beginning of each iteration, and that includes the very first one. The code inside the while loop might not execute at all if the condition is false from the start. Now, let's look at an example of how this while loop is supposed to work. Let me get rid of that. I'll also get rid of the comment there. So we're going to start here. We have current passengers, and this is a variable that we're going to initialize to 0. Remember, when we were discussing the loops, we talked about the initialization. So setting up a counter or control variable before the loop executes, and that is exactly what current passenger is. So this is our counter. Next, we have the condition. So the condition, the Boolean condition appears in the parentheses. So our condition is quite simple. Current passengers, as long as the current passengers is less than 14. So in the loop body, we have the loop body first. What do we expect? What line of code or block of code do we expect to be executed over and over again? So what we expect is this system.out.println. So waiting for a passenger current passenger. So in the current passenger, what we're going to have here is actually quite simple. We can just append or concatenate the current passengers variable there. Then next, simulate the passengers getting in. So this is where we have, we called it the iteration or the update. So that is where we have that. So iteration or the update, whichever terminology you're going to use. So at this point is where we take current passengers and then we increment by 1. We simply add 1. Okay, now let's have a look at how this works. I'll just come here. We shall compile this first while example .java. So since we don't have any syntax errors, I expect this to compile successfully. Then when we are done, excuse me, when we are done, we're just going to load the bytecode there. So that is how we have it. Now, here's one problem, assuming I might call it a problem. It's actually starting the count from 0 all the way to 13, but we were talking about 14 passengers. In actual sense, there are 14, yes, but here's how we can change it. We can actually come here and update the counter to start from 1 instead of 0. Then, when we get to the current passengers, instead of just saying less than 14, we can actually say less than or equal to 14, meaning count up to the 14th passenger. It's basically the same, it's just that we've changed where we are starting and where we're stopping, just to keep up with the consistency of our Matatu example. So when we run the bytecode or load the bytecode, now we get that. So that is the while loop. We talked about the counter, where we initialize the variable that is actually going to keep track of our position in the loop. Next, we look at the Boolean condition. So the Boolean condition is supposed to be evaluated to true if the loop body is going to be executed. From there, we have the loop body. Since we are talking about how our block of code or our line of code is going to be executed again and again and again, that is where we have this system.out.println, we expect this to be repeated over and over again until now the 14th passenger is aboard the Matatu. From there, we have the update or the iteration. This is where we simply instruct the loop counter variable that we want you to be updating by one by one by one. So for every iteration, that is the while loop. That is how the while loop looks. The other loop that I would like us to go to is now the for loop. So here's how we're going to do it. Yeah, I'll just begin with, for example, the class first. So I'll save this. From there, I'll just add main method. Here's what we're going to do about the for loop. We're just going to allow me to just create the for loop. Then we will look at how it works. The beauty about the for loop is this. So allow me to skip and come all the way there. So the beauty about the for loop is that the three parts that we talked about, initialization, condition, and the update or the iteration, are all within the brackets of the for keyword. That's the beauty about the for loop. It works the same. Ideally, the whole concept is the same. So for the same three parts, counter, the Boolean condition, and then the iteration or the update, they are all going to be within the for loop. So I'll just copy this. I'll come and paste it there. That's the first part. The second part is the Boolean condition. So as long as the current passenger is less than or equal to 14, keep iterating. Then the final part is the update. From there, what exactly do we expect? The loop body. Now, the loop body actually won't change. It won't change. Probably something we can do different is so system.out.println. Something that we can do different is probably the message that we want to be displaying. So passenger. Then we can append the current passenger there. Then has entered the Matatu. So we have that. How the loop works doesn't change. How the loop works doesn't change. What we are doing is simply creating a different type of loop. So how does the for loop work now? It's the same basically, but let's look at it this way. So in the case of John and his Matatu, this is when John has a clear mental picture. So I need to pick up exactly 14 passengers, but I'll do so one by one. So he knows the start, he knows the end, and he knows how to get from one to the next. So the key characteristics here is that all the control logic, so we talk about the initialization, we talk about the condition, we talk about the increment and decrement, is declared in one line at the top of the loop. These three parts here. And they are each supposed to be separated by the semicolon. That is according to the syntax rules of Java. Now, the other thing about the for loop is that we have guaranteed execution. So it can execute 0 times if the condition is false initially. So, but generally, it's used when you have a fixed number of iterations or a clear range. But the whole idea, the point is, it works the same. So let's see. For example, .java. Then we're just going to run it, and we get that. So passenger 1 has entered the Matatu, 2, 3, all the way to passenger number 14. So that's the for loop. That's the basic structure of the for loop. The point is, they are not different. The only thing that differs in the three loops is how the three loops are actually supposed to be written. Now, the final loop that we have is the do while, and you'll excuse my naming convention, but it's easier because this is going to be easier to remember. But we said you're at liberty to give your classes any name that you wish. We are not limited in any way. So the do while loop. This is how we're going to look at the do while loop. Allow me to copy the initialization. Again, it's not going to differ in any way. In the do while loop, we have declaration of the loop counter variable. So when we declare the loop counter variable, it's basically the same thing that we have been doing since we began. Next, the do while loop has a sort of different structure. So what happens here is the loop body plus the update or the iteration come first. Then finally the condition is checked much later on. So the structure changes, but ideally how the loop works is the same. Now when it comes to the loop body and the iteration, we know what we're supposed to do. So we can add a print line statement here. Now in our print line, current passengers, and then we can maybe display that variable we call current passengers there. From there, we actually update. So current passengers plus plus there. Finally, we check for the condition. So as long as the current passengers is less than or equal to 14, meaning we are not yet there. The Matatu is not yet full. So something curious about how the do while loop works, but first, the key point here that I am trying to drive is that it's not different. So do while example there. Then we are going to run it, and that's what we get. So let's just understand this. It's not different in any way. Okay. Now, in the case of John and his Swift Safari Matatu, this is when John says, I am going to open the door and I am going to shout for passengers at least once, even if no one is around. And then, if I haven't met my minimum, probably we could say in order for the Matatu to leave the stage, the minimum number of passengers is 5. So if I don't get the minimum, I'll keep shouting. So the key characteristic here is that the code block inside do is executed first, and then the condition is checked later. So on this point, when we talk about guaranteed execution, the code inside the do while loop is guaranteed to execute at least once. Beauty about it is that the condition is always checked later. So even if this condition were false, we expect at least, or this statement to be executed at least once. So those are loops. So those are 3 types of loops. We do have one more loop that we call the for each loop, but that one is used for specifically arrays. We shall get to that. Now, imagine if John had to manually tell his tout to usher in passengers and then count them 14 separate times. So it would be tedious. It's actually prone to errors, and it's just inefficient, plain and simple. So in programming, loops help us, or they save us from writing repetitive code. So they allow us to automate tasks that need to be done multiple times, whether it's processing a list of customer orders, whether it's drawing every pixel on a screen, or in John's case, filling his matatu with passengers. So, the next time you hop into a matatu, or even just see one pass by, think of John and his tireless work. And remember, he is running a loop, just like our Java programs. So that's it for today, good people. If you enjoyed this short story, hit that like button, subscribe to Java with John, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions about loops or any other Java topics. See you in the next one.